Welcome back to the reading of Tintern Abbey. If we look at the poem, we shall see that the poet does not suppress his excitement or emotional outburst upon his return to the idyllic Wye Valley after 5 years. Despite its meditative quality, the poem also reveals an intimate conversational tone, evident in the final stanza. And in fact, the poem can be called a monologue. Let's now start with the first stanza. Here we go. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here, under this dark sycamore, and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, are clad in one green hue, and lose themselves amid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up, in silence, from among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem, of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, whereby his fire the hermit sits alone. Well, the poet is both joyful and thoughtful. He feels home, and it appears as if he is welcomed by the murmuring Wye, these steep and lofty cliffs, and the wild, secluded landscape, dotted with pastoral farms. And we have reference to plots of cottage ground, orchards, groves and copses, hedgerows, and camps of gypsies or a hermit's shack, amid other things. And if we study this picture of the landscape carefully, we can identify a basic difference between the romantic and the previous neoclassical attitude to nature. In pre-romantic poetry of the Augustans, nature remains orderly. Hedgerows must be neatly arranged, lines should ideally be straight lines, and every element of nature must be brought under the control of man. But in Wordsworth, nature is found occupying a space between chaos and order, or the exotic and the ordinary, or say the wilderness and the tamed familiarity. Thus, we find that the hedgerows are hardly hedgerows, but little lines of sportive wood run wild, and the cottage ground, the orchard, they actually lose themselves amid groves and copses. Again, the borders of the pastoral farms are inhabited by homeless gypsies. This description may draw our attention to one more socio-economic aspect of contemporary England: the industrialization and the misery of the socio-economically deprived. Though the town Tintern supported ironwork during Wordsworth's visit, as historical sources prove, those workshops were not functional. Thus the smoke is here not a sign of industrial expansion; it evokes, rather, the image of a gypsy camp or a secluded hermitage, and these homeless vagrants point to the social deprivation of England towards the end of the 18th century. Now come to the second stanza. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is the landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms, and amid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet, felt in the blood, and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood, in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood, in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body, and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Well, here we see that this stanza is talking about the experience and realization of some kind of tranquil and transcendental feelings, imparted by the loving memory of the landscape or nature in general during the poet's 5-year absence. Though tranquility is something many of us can relate, probably that is why we cherish the memory of some of our holiday tours and always long to return to those favorite places of ours, taking a break from our normal routine bound life. But transcendental feeling can only be gathered by a mystic or a visionary or a seer like our poet. Such a gift can lead the mystic to a trance, as experienced by prophets or yogis or monks during intense meditation. Thus, the memory of the Vai and the beautiful valley imparts two gifts upon our poet. First, it restores the peace and the tranquility, and thereby leading to forgotten pleasures. to be discovered in small acts of kindness and of love. Then it leads to a gifted insight into the life of things when the joyful soul gets harmonized with the universe. The third stanza is more or less a continuation of the same feeling, and let's see what the poet says in the third stanza. But before that, have a look at the annotations meant for the second stanza. In this stanza, the two gifts mentioned by the poet are very important. The first one, as I have quoted from the text, a kind of tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure. And the second one, which is another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood. In fact, the prophetic vision that ultimately enables the mature poet to see into the life of things. The poet becomes a seer, a visionary. Now, the third stanza. If this be but a vain belief, yet oh, how oft in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless delight, when the fretful star unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Vai, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee. Here probably our poet anticipates the reader's confusion or doubt in understanding these two gifts of nature. Hence, he verifies his experience once again, and he wonders how often those memories have worked like a miracle, a kind of therapy or drug for his mind and soul in hours of fretful stir and fever. From these three stanzas, we can probably conclude that Wordsworth, as a mature thinker, loved nature not for her own sake. Rather, for him, nature was the visible embodiment of some supramundane glory. And another curious aspect of Wordsworth's relationship with nature is that, as a nature poet, he only deals with the benign aspects of nature. He is probably the greatest nature poet of the world, but it is the tranquil aspects of nature that primarily draws the attention of William Wordsworth. And as a nature poet, he generally overlooks or ignores the malignant aspects of nature. Nature indeed sometimes acts cruel. Then we find nature red in tooth and claw, to use that famous expression of Tennyson. But Wordsworth, however, remains silent so far regarding this malignant form of nature. Tintern Abbey is usually regarded as the first great mystical poem of William Wordsworth, and not only does he present the description of the landscape through these first three stanzas, but he also makes an eloquent confirmation of the mystical faith. The critics are of the opinion that William Blake was not so enthusiastic about nature, and rather he thought that nature was there to deceive us. But for Wordsworth, nature was more than his muse. Nature was like his spiritual guide, like a teacher teaching the philosophy of life. Obviously, Wordsworth could not acquire this philosophy of life in his boyhood or early youth. He had to wait for his mature age or manhood to develop this prophetic vision. This story of the growth of the poet's mind is also uh, the primary concern of Tintern Abbey. And in the next stanza, that is in the fourth stanza, we shall see how Wordsworth records that spiritual growth or a kind of awakening through three distinct phases. So in the next lecture, we shall try to read the remaining two stanzas and thus we would be able to finish our text. So thank you.